After Cassie, Jake, and Marco headed for the toy factory, Rachel and Tobias made their way to the edge of the village. Tobias was flying well overhead, and although he told Rachel it was so he could keep a lookout, it was really that he was feeling conflicting feelings. On the one hand, Rachel said he looked good in his partridge outfit, and she had spent a lot of time creating that outfit for him. On the other hand, she just snapped at him when he offered to look out for her. On another hand, he was a hawk. While all the confusion of middle school puberty was still coursing through his brain, his body had already made its change. That the change was wings and feathers and talons, rather than a beard and leg hair and a deep voice, was different, sure. But this was it for Tobias. Rachel walked through the snow down below. She still wasn't sure which morph she'd use to meet the fire elves. Dancer had cautioned her away from some because, as he'd said, the fire elves are some of the oldest elves in the North Pole and haven't always been as civilized as they are today. She wasn't worried though. In each of their walks through the Christmas tree forest, she'd acquired new morphs, and if all else failed, she could always morph into an elephant. That would get anyone's attention, even an ancient elven civilization. The directions from Dancer sent her to a part of the village that looked totally different than the bright, festive toy factory. It was still very much the North Pole, but the buildings were older and closer together. Tents from street vendors crowded the sidewalks. Windows were frosted up and the decorations were more handcrafted and mismatched, even on the same building. Most of the shops were closed for the evening, though through a few windows, Rachel could see elves around smoky bars, mugs of eggnog in hand, and she could faintly hear slow, sad versions of traditional Christmas songs. Decorations inside looked like they'd been hung up once years before and then never taken down. It wasn't uninviting, just lived in. At the corner of a block, Rachel spotted her destination, United Fire Elves Local number 809, the Fire Elf Union Hall. Just as Dancer suspected, all the lights were on inside, and Rachel could see elves coming and going, and a small group gathered out front. "Tobias," she said, as loud as she could without anyone hearing. "Hey, Tobias, where are you?" They hadn't really talked about how this would go. Even though she hadn't wanted him to come along, Rachel thought it would be nice to have a familiar face around now. After just a minute, Tobias swooped down and landed on top of a light post. "That's the place, huh?" Tobias said. "Looks safe enough, I guess." "Of course it's safe," Rachel replied. "But I want to watch it from outside the windows first to scope it out. Could you see anything else up ahead?" "It's clear. The only elves outside you can see from here, and there's windows all around the building," Tobias said. "Okay, I'm going to slip around back to morph," said Rachel. She walked around behind some evergreen trees in a landscaping container where she could stash her winter coat and boots before she morphed. Even here, ornaments hung in the trees that were more dull with age, and long since burned out light strands were buried deep inside the branches. Rachel shoved her coat and boots under the trees, then morphed. She was smaller, on 4 legs, with thick, warm, white wool. She reemerged from the landscaping to where Tobias was waiting. "What's that supposed to be?" asked Tobias. "It's a sheep, Tobias. Duh," answered Rachel. "I know it's a sheep, but how is that supposed to help you here?" Tobias said. "You know, shepherds abide in the field and keep watch over the flocks by night." "Come on, Tobias," Rachel answered. "The sheep were there. There's always sheep. Ugh." "These are fire elves, Rachel, not shepherds," Tobias protested, but Rachel was already walking towards the UFE hall. She turned down the alley next to the building in order to reach the rear windows unseen. Tobias soared down from the light post and joined her at a window. Inside, there must have been every fire elf in the North Pole. Although there were rows of metal folding chairs out, the elves were spread all over the building. On the walls were portraits with names etched into the frames, shelves full of trophies and plaques, a display case with a forest scene painted on the background, 3 pristine sets of flints and steels displayed on plush velvet pillows. 3 folding tables were out with a spread of food on a dazzling array of serving dishes, crock pots, reusable bags, platters, and paper plates. 3 stacks of styrofoam cups were next to 6 carafes, each labeled with handwritten signs on masking tape. In the direction all the chairs were facing was a single carved wooden lectern with a mic stand and a portable PA. Behind the lectern, a flag hung from the ceiling, partially obscured by a pull-down screen. "Look on that flag, Tobias," said Rachel. "Is that an eagle? Should I have morphed into my bald eagle?" Tobias looked at the flag with his hawk eyes. From there, he could see every stitch, every thread in the embroidery. "I think that's a phoenix. You know, a firebird, which makes sense." "Damn," said Rachel. "I should have been an eagle, and then I could have gone in costume like you, but as a phoenix. Shit." Rachel looked down at her sheep body. Shit, what was I thinking? From behind her, a voice spoke. "What have we here? A sheep? And a partridge, I guess? Huh." It was a group of fire elves, presumably the same who had been out front earlier. "Cold night for a sheep." The elves looked at each other. "But we could bring it in, warm it up a little, maybe light a fire under it." The elves laughed and they waved their hands at Tobias. "Fly home, little partridge. There's a lonely pear tree out there somewhere tonight." Tobias couldn't risk drawing unnecessary attention, but he also didn't want to leave Rachel to unknown elves. He hovered in the air just above their heads until a flame broke out in the dark. A fire elf had lit a match in the air. Tobias flew up onto the roof of the hall. Had that elf tried to burn him? "Ha ha, there's a good partridge," the elf said before lowering the match to a pipe in its mouth. Rachel could see all of this happening, but her dumb sheep brain was more than happy to be herded along with the elves. Also, she really wanted to get inside the union hall to meet these elves in person anyway. "I'm going in," she said, so only Tobias could hear. "I don't like it, Rachel," came Tobias's reply. "That fire elf just tried to light me on fire." "Just keep an eye out, I'll be fine." Rachel thought about it and added, "If you could watch the time, that'd be a huge help." And with that, she was through the front door of UFE local number 809.
Santa was fist bumping a human from the sharing. "What up, dog?" he said to one standing out of the pool. "As you all know, tomorrow's the big day." He turned to another human to his left. "I was worried you might not make it in time." "Oh, but we did make it, of course, so you don't have to worry about that," the human said. "Barely," Santa shouted back. "None of the elves voluntarily complied, as I was assured would be the case. I'll need all of you human controllers on full alert from now until the time our sleigh leaves tomorrow night." Of course, I understand. Yes, it's just, our research indicated we thought that their smaller bodies would make them more of a willing vessels, but if anything, they've been much more trouble than the humans ever were," Santa responded. "Are you making excuses for your inability to execute your portion of the plan, Euro 8360? "No," the human shouted. "No, I just wasn't expecting—" "Wasn't expecting?" Santa repeated. "I mean, I was expecting, of course. I just didn't see—" "Didn't see how?" Santa again repeated. "Euro 8360. Even though it pains me to lose a set of hands on this crucial time, I believe I must set an example so the others can understand the urgency of the task on hand." Cassie, Jake, and Marco had their all eyes on Santa now. Just like he fired the elf Glasgow on the spot earlier, it looked like it was about to happen again here. But what actually happened was so much worse than anything they were prepared for. As the human controller continued to stammer for words, Santa began to change. At first, he just started getting bigger, everywhere. But then something else happened. 2 long necks grew from his head, red and white striped, each forming into a head on top, with 3 eyes each, a huge toothy mouth. A light blue scaled chest formed and his torso elongated. His arms and legs extended longer, narrower, and multi-hinged. And 2 more pairs sprouted out and rested on the ground. Long, sharp talons formed at the end of each appendage. Long white fur grew over his entire body. Shaggy, matted, and a slender tail with a spike on the end of it raised in the air, swinging towards the human controllers. Cassie, Jake, and Marco were speechless as the monster, Santa, had become grasped the human controller. With his tail, lifted him off the ground and devoured him with both mouths, Lady in the Tramp style.
"Oh, bon appetit,"
said the monster. It licked its talons and began transforming again, as quickly as before. But something was different. The monster wasn't transforming back into Santa. No, not at all. Instead, the Animorphs watched in terror as they saw blue fur, 4 hooves, a face with no mouth, slits for a nose, and extra eyes on stalks, a long tail, and of course, a red hat trimmed in white.
"Ah, I see I have your undivided attention now. Good, 'tis the season after all."
The Animorphs were in shock. Here they were all the way at the North Pole, when all they'd wanted was to be on a ski trip with their friends, and here was Visser 3, the Yerk leader, with an Andalite controller. This was so much worse than anything they'd imagined. There was nothing they could do now, though, except watch whatever happened next. Visser 3 approached an elf controller.
"Dawn 8401, bring me out our newest member for inspection."
At that, the elf controller lifted its hands to signal someone across the cavern. Several Hork-Bajir and a couple of Taxons bundled up in blankets wrestled with an unseen figure briefly, then approached Visser 3. The Hork-Bajir leading the pack spoke.
Visser Claus. Our subject remains highly resistant to controlling. So far, Log 485 has been able to control the subject for 1 hour and 13.52 seconds, but had to rush immediately to a pool after that. We are exhausting the amount of Yerks available for elf controllers just by the amount it takes to attempt to control this one.
Another Santa was visible now, and something was slightly off. His cheeks were pale, and his eyes didn't have any twinkle. No laughing, no jolly. Really, when he spoke, the voice was right, but the words were all wrong.
"'Tis the season, Visser Claus. I assure you, this body will be prepared for navigation tomorrow." "I assure you," Visser 3 began, "if it is not ready, all of you will pay. Now, as you know, I must retire to the pool of my own by midnight tonight in order to absorb enough Kandrona rays for the big trip on Christmas night. I am placing my colleagues from the sharing in charge of overseeing the pools tomorrow, leaving you all to absolutely have control of this old elf in time."
"We will not fail you, Visser Claus," they replied. At that, 4 Hork-Bajir grasped him, dragged him back to the cage. They were holding him. Visser 3 watched until Santa was locked behind the steel bars and the Hork-Bajir guards were in formation. He surveyed the canyon. It was all coming together. All the elf controllers he'd need to run this operation year-round. The Hork-Bajir controllers to keep them in line, and Santa Claus. Magical, space-time bending body to do in minutes what it would ordinarily take years to achieve.
"No one is to pass through my door. I'm inside," he announced. "I want guards posted here until I reemerge tomorrow."
And with that, Visser 3 was gone, into the shadow beyond the opening. Activity resumed almost immediately, as it had been before. Humans in the sharing hanging out in the sauna, Hork-Bajir controllers forcing elves to receive their yurks out of the pools, and shouts from all those imprisoned. What now? Marco asked. If Visser 3 is here and they've got Santa, and the sharing and the pools and everything, what are we supposed to do? Cassie replied, I think we have to talk to one of those elves in a cage. They've all had yurks in their head. Maybe they can remember some details that will help us. She saw the look on Jake's face. Not Tom. Not yet. He just got here, but those elves have been dealing with this for longer. We'll be back. We won't leave him this time. Okay, there's enough of a gap between the cages and wall for a French hen to fit in. But not a Hork-Bajir, Marco said. I think just one of us should go. Just in case something happens. Jake, do you want to? You know what, Marco? Jake replied. I think you've got this one. Marco was privately flattered. Even though Jake was his best friend, Marco sometimes felt like he still had to try hard to impress him. And Jake was usually the first in line for any challenge. But Marco had also been feeling a new sense of responsibility since they'd been at the North Pole. Almost like in the air. It was just a feeling. He was off in the blink of an eye. It was only 20 feet away, but to a running French hen, the distance felt like a mile. His chicken feet scuttled across the stone floor, and he was there, squeezed between and behind a cage full of elves. Even they hadn't even noticed. He looked around at the elves and settled on one near him, who was wearing a heavy-duty work apron. Focused his speech so only that elf could hear him. Marco said, Psst! Hello. Season's greetings. Or, Psst! Hey! The elf looked all around himself for the voice. Down here, Marco said. Outside the cage. Shh! I'm a French hen! The elf spotted him slowly. Carefully, the elf approached the edge of the cage and crouched down to look at the French hen. How are you? He started. Talking. I'm not really a bird. Pretty cool, huh? I mean, I'm a bird now, but really I'm a kid. The elf still looked confused, but Marco kept right on. I'm a kid, but I can turn into a bird, or other animals, okay? But right, I'm here to help you get out of here. The elf had finally heard something that made sense. Okay, how do we do it? The elf asked. Well, that's what we're figuring out exactly. But we know all about the yurks and Visser 3 and the pools and all of it. We came here to stop them, Marco continued. Okay. But how... Well, so... What do we do? How do I help? The elf said confusingly. Marco considered the question now before answering. I need information. Can you remember anything about the Yurk's plan? Anything at all? From when the thing was in your brain? What are they trying to do with Santa? The elf shuddered. Clearly, just the memory of being controlled by a Yurk was terrifying. The elf tried to piece together any fragments at all. Sleigh? Visser Claus? Visser 3, you called him? Has something like a sleigh. They want to use Santa's body like a compass or a hyperdrive or something for the sleigh. And Santa can manipulate space-time, you know? That's how he does it on Christmas night. Okay, that's good, Marco said. Anything else? Anything at all? I don't think so. The elf was concentrating as hard as possible. There's a Chondrona ray? Asked Marco. Yeah, that's it, the elf said. Of course, Marco said. The Yurks get their life force from Chondrona. Without it, they can't survive on our world. Do you know anything else about it? What it looks like? How big it is? The elf considered. No, I'm sorry. Well, that's all right, Marco answered. I've got an idea of what we're up against now. I have to bring this information back to my friends so we can make a plan. But we'll be back for you. I promise. He didn't wait any longer, but ran back to where Cassie and Jake were waiting. What did you find out? Cassie asked. I'll tell you once we get out of here, Marco said. They all made their way back to the staircase.
So tell me again. You're a sheep, but also not. And an elephant and an eagle. And a girl too. A fire elf was face to face with Rachel in her sheep morph. She'd gone ahead and spoken when it looked like they were going to tie her legs together. There wasn't a spit over the fire just yet, but these looked like elves who had a spit ready to go. Yes, so don't be afraid, she thought about it. I bring your urgent tidings of great concern for all the people. There is this day in the village, Years, who are from the highest reaches of outer space. Huh, said the fire elf. A sheep appears to us on Christmas Eve, claiming to be a human girl, and not just any Christmas Eve, but the one that will be remembered forever as the day Santa fired the fire elves. This fire elf had the attention of the whole room now. Other fire elves stopped their conversations and held their plates of food in their hands, watching to see what would happen next. We know exactly what came to pass to the fire elves today, Rachel said. No one should be able to treat their workers like that. Not even Santa fucking Claus. She cut herself off, fully aware of what she'd just called Santa. Stupid, she thought to herself. Fucking stupid. Insult fucking Santa first thing. Fuck. She looked sheepishly around the room. The fire elves. While they did resemble the ideas she'd always had in her head of elves, these were somehow both more gorgeous and also rougher around the edges than she'd expected. These were elves who had known hard work, who knew celebration, who clearly had ancient Yuletides behind them. Surely they went way back with Santa. Fa-la-la! Fa-la-la-la-la! What is happening? Rachel thought. The fire elf in front of her was laughing. Fa-la-la-la! Others were joining in. This was most certainly laughing now. The first fire elf addressed Rachel again. Well said, sheep. No one should do that to working elves. Rachel let out the biggest sigh of relief ever. Whoa, okay, so you believe me? What's not to believe? The fire elf responded. It's just that I'm like a rando sheep or whatever, she answered. Look, the fire elf said, we live in a place where reindeer know how to fly, and so... Rachel was the one laughing now. I guess you're right. By the way, my name's Rachel. Season's greetings, Rachel. I'm Gradlele. Please have a seat so we can continue talking. Gradlele eyed Rachel's sheep morph, unsure if the seat was an appropriate thing to offer. If it's all the same, Rachel said, I could morph back into my normal human body. Of course, Rachel. Do you need anything? Gradlele asked. I don't normally morph in front of anyone, though I guess you've probably seen everything here in the North Pole, Rachel answered. Truthfully, I'm interested to observe your powers, but you're not under any obligation to show them to me or anyone here. We can pull down the projector screen the rest of the way, and you can morph back there in private, Gradlele said. Thank you, Rachel said. If you want to watch, that's okay with me, but I'd appreciate privacy from anyone else. Gradlele went to lower the screen fully, and Rachel followed behind. Okay, Rachel said, I'm ready. As Gradlele watched, Rachel's arms and legs grew longer, the cloven feet turning into human feet and hands, the wool shortening, then disappearing completely as flesh and a leotard replaced it. She grew taller, and her human face and blonde hair returned. She now stood several feet taller than Gradlele, and her head nearly touched the ceiling. Okay, so that's it? Inquired Gradlele. Yep, this is me, answered Rachel. Gradlele continued to look at her, not saying whatever she was thinking. Rachel felt put on the spot in a way she never did back home. Gradlele noticed and said, Right, yeah, good. I just forgot that you're a human girl, and so tall. It's very different, but good. Okay. Rachel felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. Maybe this had been a mistake, but no. What she'd seen on the factory floor was wrong, and so what if these ungrateful... We don't see many humans, almost none up here at the pool. Actually, sorry about the ceiling, that looks a little uncomfortable. Rachel was back. The ceiling is the best. What was she saying? So stupid, she thought. She paused, looked at Gradlele, who also visibly thought what she just said was weird. They looked at each other for a second, then both burst out laughing.
Cool. Thanks, babe. Alright. Oh man, everything's so much clearer. That's so crazy. Rachel told the fire elves everything about how they'd gotten to the North Pole, and everything that they'd seen that day. She was working on her second plate of food as Gradley... Shit, how the fuck do you even say that? Gradley?
Yup.
Cool. As Gradley responded, maybe 2 months ago now or more, some of the other elves on the floor started to lose their Christmas spirit. At first, just a few. We noticed with some of the Ore elves, any power that can't be generated by fire, they provide. So we have a reason to work together from time to time. But they're mostly behind the scenes, not like some of the other elves, the Taylor elves, or the Bake elves. But then, others too. And then that new staircase just appeared one day. But only the elves who lost the Christmas spirit were going down there. Anymore, I'd say 70-80% of the elves are going down there. Rachel considered this, but none of the fire elves. Gradley looked to her left and right as a hush came over the room. She responded, one fire elf. After a pause, she continued, Logreson, we suspected, but no one was certain until we saw them head down those stairs one morning. When they came home that night, we were waiting. Rachel gasped, covering her mouth, but not daring to interrupt. We brought them here to the hall to question them, find out more. They were clearly not themselves, and the more we asked, the more pain they seemed to be in. We put them under house arrest, kept the doors and windows covered, but still provided food, eggnog, everything, until Gradley stopped. Say their name. All the fire elves in the hall said, Loberson. Gradley continued. After a few days, they were in visible pain, exhausted. We gave them all the care we could, but it wasn't enough. After the end, something withered and dried dislodged itself from Loberson's head, like a dehydrated slug. A yerk, Rachel said. We know that now, thanks to you, Gradley said. After that, we kept a strict buddy system in place, never letting a fire elf go off by themselves. Always in touch, always together, and we're all still here. As Gradley said, Rachel started upright. Tobias, she said out loud. The fire elves looked at her, confused. Tobias, one of my friends, he's supposed to be keeping watch outside, but completely forgot about him. I have to go outside. Gradley stood up with Rachel. I'm coming with you. Rachel and Gradley went out to the front door they'd entered. When? Hours ago. She should have heard something from Tobias by now. Outside, Rachel was freezing. Gradley, I don't see him anywhere. But my coat and boots are just around the corner. Maybe we can get those and look for him too. Gradley nodded and followed Rachel to the evergreen tree where she stashed her winter clothes. They were still where she left them, but no sign of Tobias. After Rachel had her warm clothes back on, they returned to the hall and searched all around the perimeter. Maybe we can send out a search party, Rachel suggested. Gradley shook her head. I'm sorry, Rachel. With everything that's been going on recently, it's not safe for us to send any of ours past our neighborhood right now. There are other things than elves here, Rachel, and recently, she shivered. Maybe more because of whatever she was thinking other than because of the cold. Come on, we should get back inside and figure out who's going to get you back to Dancer's place tonight. I can't, Gradley, I can't. Rachel was holding back tears. You said so yourself. When there was a problem, you never let another fire elf out of your sight. But that's just what I've done. I've lost one of my own. Gradley reached up to place a small hand on Rachel's arm. At that same moment, far up in the sky, an approximation of a partridge was circling. He hadn't noticed when a human girl and a fire elf ran outside from the home. He hadn't noticed when they walked down the block or back to the circle of the hall several times. He had his eyes trained on something else, off past the Fire Elf neighborhood, on the edges of Christmas Tree Forest. But he saw them now. Rachel, in her normal body, and a fire elf, was standing in the snow under the glow of a single strand of Christmas lights strung over the doorway. He wheeled back down and dove down toward them. "Tobias!" Rachel shouted. "Tobias, where have you been?" "I had something I had to do," Tobias replied. Rachel was so relieved she hadn't lost him that she let a cagey response go right by. "I was so worried when you came out and you weren't here," Rachel said. "Oh, Gradley, this is Tobias. Tobias Gradley is the head of the Fire Elf Union." Tobias perched on a newspaper stand out on the sidewalk. "Season's greetings, Gradley," he said to the Fire Elf. "Season's greetings to you," Gradley replied. "A red-tailed hawk, huh? Possibly a distant cousin or our own emblem, the phoenix. Magnificent. If you'd like to join us inside, Tobias, I'm sure we can offer you something to eat, and maybe redo the costume if you'd like, while we determine who will see you back home." Tobias flew in a quick 360 loop of acknowledgement. After where he'd just been, he was glad to be back where they were friendly faces, and would take Gradley up on another wardrobe change.